All right, I'm going to be talking about what is reverse time. And this camera keeps weirding out. Okay, so let's see if I move this way. Okay, maybe that'll work. Okay, I've been reading these two books. This is the one I got from Interlibrary Loan. Let's see, we go. And then I was getting the car worked on, and this city I go to has got a big evangelical, charismatic population. Let's see if I get up here. Okay, so I found this book on the panoramic seer. Of that. Anyway, that's a spiritual. It's a guy who claims to be a spiritual healer, and he has a following. So there's churches that are set up that sort of like follow him. Sorry, this lighting is all messed up. This new camera is weird. So the issue is, what is reverse time? Maybe this will work. And it's sort of a religious issue because these books I'm reading, there's a good book by Professor Norm Cohn about, I think it's called Chaos and the Cosmos and the World to Come. And it's about basically the concept of linear time was promoted by Zoroastrian philosophy, and then I guess it was Persia conquered Israel or something like that. And this book I'm reading now goes into that a bit, and it's analyzing the book of Enoch and how much of an influence the book of Enoch was on the New Testament and Christianity. And so the whole idea is like, also David F. Noble, he goes into this a lot with the religion of technology. And so when we think of the Iron Age and technology, like I've been having the car worked on, and I have a lot of rust on the car. So that's my next project, is to get some more rust fixed. And so this is what they would call, in science, they would call it entropy. Entropy being the time as randomness, creating randomness as a dissipation of heat. So you have a chemical reaction, and the form as matter loses its structure, and it turns random. And of course you see this in a lot of horror movies, like the Thing and the Blob, and I just saw the Blob. And Slavoj Žižek, the communist philosopher, he talks about this a lot, where he, this psychological trauma, he calls it like a stain. So it's what he calls the primordial repressed from he says that in Abrahamic religions, this is represented by the shofar as the ram's horn, but it's also like the word of God that Moses heard and from the mountaintop, I guess, when he got the 10 commandments. But everybody, he's up in the mountain, but everybody else hears just this noise of the shofar. But the idea is that primordial repressed is not it's not actually noise. That is the Om of the universe. And so like in Taoism, if you study like a Chuang-Tzu, he's one of the early Taoist philosophers, like Lao Tzu, but it's Chuang-Tzu. And he basically argues, humans, we talk, but essentially what we're saying is no different than when we listen to other animals and the animals make noise, and we just think they're making noise, But science has proven that chimpanzees use sign language when they talk. So, like, I'm moving my hand around because originally the meaning of our words, of our sounds, was tied to our gestures. And then what happened is that like chimpanzees, they use tools. The females use spears to hunt, so they're not dependent on being raped by the males, because the males bring home meat and then demand sex in exchange for the meat. So you can see this parallel with the development of human language, and this is what the radical anthropologists research group has argued, that from Chris Knight's book Blood Relations, that the synchronization of the lunar cycle with the menstruation of females is based on a sex strike, so that there's a labor solidarity, so the females can trust the males to do long distance hunting. And one of the corollaries of this is that humans have a very bad sense of smell, because most animals, their reproductive cycle is triggered by smell. But for humans, the reason we have a bad sense of smell is so we can work closely together in a group of males and females without the males being, or just without our reproduction being triggered by this smelling each other. So it's kind of like the science now considers smell to be quantum biology. And so to get back to this idea of time, what is reverse time? What they're studying in quantum biology is that the smell is based on phase and quantum frequency. So, for example, the difference between orange and lemon is just a phase difference of the same quantum frequency. So normally when people think of phase in like, you can get those noise canceling headphones, and what they do is they reverse the phase of the sound around you to create silence. But the the quantum phase is not, it's a different kind of phase because it's non-commutative phase, because it's non-local. So what that means is, like, if you think of phase as being right-handed or left-handed based on the chirality of the molecule. So the this is what they call the isotopes, or you can change the chirality and you're changing an isotope, and or the it's a so it's like the difference between lemon and orange is just this. In terms of smell, what they're proving is that you can have the same frequency, but the whole point is it's non-local. It's a non-local perception. And what makes smell different is that it bypasses the cerebral cortex, so it's not processed as a subconscious. Normally, when we have our eyes open, like most of our brain relies on vision to process vision. It's about, I think, a third of our brain, or no, 2/3 of our brain's energy. So the brain operates on like 25 watts of energy, but in fact that's being used to process 2/3 of that is maybe 18 watts is used for processing vision. And so when we meditate with the eyes closed, what people don't realize is that we have biophotons, and so that energy, all of our chemical reactions in the body, they actually originate from this coherent biophoton energy that's actually laser energy. And so when we listen to the source of light, what we're doing is we're going to the source of our perceptions as a non-local phase reversal. And because it's non-local, it's also non-commutative. And so we normally in science, we think of time as a spatial wavelength. And so we can reverse the phase, and that would be reverse time. But in quantum, when you reverse the time in quantum physics, it's actually relativistic, and that's the source of spin. And so the electron is 1/2 spin. And because it's 1/2 spin, that means it's 720 degrees to measure the electron externally. And so the electron exists inherently non-locally, that it cannot be visualized because it has that, like a Mobius strip, it's flipped around. For every 0 point in space, you have this non-locality of the electron. Now, based on the Durbeej law of phase harmony, if you analyze the quantum uncertainty of position and momentum, it actually originates from time and frequency. And you can do this. You can just look at Heisenberg's uncertainty principle of momentum and position, and you just realize, based on Durbeej, that the momentum is directly proportional to frequency, and the time would be the wavelength as the position. And so you can just derive that the position and momentum is actually the non-commutative time and frequency. So then when we say, well, what is reverse time? We have to realize that all matter originates as light. And therefore, the light itself actually has this newly discovered force as a spin a spin force. And what's interesting is the Nobel physicist I think his first name, he goes by C.N. Yang. He's Chinese. I can't remember his first name, but I quoted, he has a speech on YouTube where he says, well, why can't we utilize this spin force? And he got the Nobel Prize for the electroweak force, and the whole point of the electroweak force is that it inherently breaks the symmetry of the, because normally science assumes a symmetry of space-time based on relativity. So like when you hear about quantum field theory, mainstream science, they assume quantum field theory is real, is the foundation of quantum physics and relativity. But the problem is that, as Professor Jean Bremont points out, and he's relying on the de Broglie-Bohm model of reality, saying that all you have to do is look at John Bell's experiments on the testing the Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen critique of quantum entanglement, that there's this spooky action at a distance. And what Bell proved is that there's no way to inherently predict the spooky action at a distance in terms of linear causality of a linear time. So that this is why the reverse time is inherently uncertain. It would be considered undetermined, but in quantum field theory, they're assuming a zero symmetric rest frame. But what Jean Bremont is pointing out is that quantum field theory has been debunked by the Bell inequality that was proven. They proved quantum entanglement, and is inherently indeterminate. And these experiments that went on up until very recently, and then there was an article maybe like 10 years ago where they said Einstein has been disproven, about spooky action at a distance. But essentially what they had to do to disprove Einstein is they had to split one photon. So when you split one photon, you're creating entanglement, first of all, but there's a phase difference. And so it's only by using these weak measurements that Yakir Aronoff, his research group, has been doing with the weak measurements where they split one photon again, but they do it in the context of the double slit experiment. And so what they're doing is they're saying there's this reverse time force that they call a negaparticle, because they're using the Heisenberg model instead of the Schrodinger equation. They're using the matrices that Dirac and Born used, from Heisenberg. Because Heisenberg, he realized that the light is non-commutative for the Ritz-Rydberg combination principle from using spectrometry of light. So the non-commutative math, the combination that Heisenberg discovered, was actually he didn't know it was matrices mathematics. But then Dirac used the Poisson bracket to try to convert it back to the Schrodinger equation. And so with the the Dirac spin, the relativity, it's an extension, the spinner of the Dirac equation, it's an extension of the Schrodinger equation because Dirac was trying to maintain the symmetry, whereas the Professor Basil J. Hiley, continuing on in David Bohm's work, their whole point is that there's this hidden imaginary time within the Schrodinger wave equation. And if you just, all you have to do, their whole point is that this is non-commutative. Well, this was Basil J. Hiley's new extension of David Bohm, just taking it, analyzing it on a deeper level. That really what David Bohm was talking about with the quantum potential is this non-commutative time and frequency as momentum. And so the Yakir Aronoff, he calls that modular momentum because you have to have two vectors. And the vectors are the non-commutative matrices that Alain Kahn also uses. So you have the 4x4 matrices, and then you have the imaginary number matrix, which is the 2x2 matrix. And so the vectors would be using frequency, but because it's based on Dirac, the spinner is within the Bloch sphere. So the probability value when you square the amplitude as the imaginary number with a negative frequency, then you have to, using a complex wave, then it cancels out the negative. The reverse time gets canceled out. And then the value has to be equal to 1 as based on the symmetry of this Bloch sphere. But, and this is why the frequency differences then are, you actually have three frequencies. You're comparing two different particles based on see that's why when you use an entangled particle in the weak measurement, then you're revealing this inherent non-locality of reality. It's a process, and so it's, as Basil J. Hiley points out, it's not mechanics, it's not quantum mechanics, but rather it's organic. It's an organic flow or process that inherently can't be measured, because at every 0 point of space-time, there already is this future and the past overlapping. So this is Ruth E. Kastner, the PhD. I corresponded with her, and her big emphasis is that the weak measurements, they're assuming this static space-time with the two-vector measurement, whereas what she's emphasizing is this quantum potential, just as David Bohm coined, from Aristotle, where you have this potential infinity. So the future is always flowing and harmonizing the present and reversing the past. And of course, because of science being limited to an external measurement process, then you have to, when you do the mathematics, you're actually manipulating the future, as in quantum algebra, through quantum entanglement. So you can construct a quantum entanglement experiment that then it's not predeterministic, but it is. But essentially, if you use this two-vector construction, you're able to, if you use an entangled particle, then you're able to prove that in fact the future was influencing the past. Now, Roger Penrose's whole point is that in order to understand that consciousness is what actually unifies relativity and quantum physics, then we have to approach the unification through quantum biology. And this is what Basil J. Hiley means when he says that quantum physics is actually organic and it's not a mechanics. And Basil J. Hiley also emphasizes that our ecological crisis is due to this wrong mechanical, model of reality that's from Platonic symmetric physics and, set up by Newton and Galileo and so continued on through modern physics. And so then, in classical physics, you have the Hamiltonian and the Lagrangian, and that's continued on with the Schrödinger equation. And so Basil J. Hiley is saying, look, we don't have to even use the wave equation from Schrödinger. And you have this classical limit where that's where the Poisson bracket would kick in again to go back to the symmetry. But his whole point is like, well, you don't even have to collapse the wave function. And if you don't have to collapse the wave function, as Eddie Ocean's taught, we can have this macro quantum non-commutativity, because non-commutativity, unlike standard quantum physics, non-commutativity is not limited to the micro scale. Because normally in standard quantum physics, they dismiss quantum biology because they say, look, you got to have the collapse of the wave function. So what Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have proven now with the collaboration of Dr. Anirban Bandyopadhyay, with whom I've corresponded with him, and his point is, well, actually, there's a resonance through the scales, so that it actually is, you can like retroactively resonate. So the negative resonance is the reverse time resonance back into the ultrasonic frequency, which would be the microsecond wavelength. And that's what harmonizes the right and left ear as a phase coherence. So that as physics professor Manfred Euler, with whom I've corresponded, he says, well, the right and left ear are basically like a double slit experiment, like an interferometer, where the wave coherence is actually non-locality, because you're dealing with on the atomic level. Like if you look at the forced atomic microscope, which he's using that forced atomic microscope, he's saying basically you can see this quantum coherence arising from the de Broglie negative frequency and reverse time resonance as non-locality. So what happens is that the ultrasound is quantum coherence of the microtubules from the tubulin as a metamaterial. And so the metamaterial, essentially what you have is a sub wavelength in by the reversal of the phase between the tubulin and the metamaterial. And then this is also what NIMPS, he did these experiments with sound also, and he was able to transmit sound at a superluminal speed. Gunter NIMPS. And I haven't finished reading his book. I got to finish reading his book. But he does a really good job of explaining this, the physics of it. And of course, mainstream physics dismisses his claim because, again, they're assuming this constraint of the time frequency uncertainty and the inability to convert that time back into frequency, because you're limited by the assuming time as a spatial measurement. But his whole point is that time is not a spatial measurement. And he said, in fact, this superluminal acoustic, like phonon energy is happening all the time around us based on just the acoustics creating this metamaterial resonance. And they've done experiments to recreate this that I've cited, where they create a superluminal, there's been some corroboration of Gunther Nymphs. So then the question is, well, what is reverse time? Again, we have to go back to light, because light, like if we think of what is our consciousness, Roger Penrose's whole point is that our true consciousness is actually this proto-consciousness, and that consciousness is the gravitational collapse of the wave function. But another way to think of this is that we define gravity as the inverse square function, and Newton got gravity, the mathematics of gravity, directly from Archytas, using the geometric irrational magnitude. And this is why Einstein there's that book, from Pythagoras to Einstein, because they're taking the Archytas math and extending it into time so you have space-time based on symmetry. But what Durbeej was doing is he was critiquing relativity from the perspective of quantum physics using frequency, and he went all the way back to the real Pythagorean, the orthodox Pythagorean analysis that frequency is inverse to time, and therefore, as you go towards the speed of light, there has to be this reverse time as a relativistic reversal of time and frequency that's secretly guiding matter in our and Durbeej, Olivier Costa de Beauregard, he pointed out to Durbeej that this proves that the paranormal and the spiritual powers are real. And Durbeej, he couldn't quite accept this. He didn't want Olivier Costa de Beauregard to publish about this. But then after Richard Feynman published his work on what do you call it? I want to say electrodynamics. Is that right? But essentially, let's see. It's not quite quantum field theory, but it's sort of in between quantum field theory and quantum mechanics. So anyway, that's where Feynman's the whole Feynman graphs, I think they're called, but his way of visualizing these, he was utilizing Dirac's antimatter, to show how these equations work to explain. For example, the magnetic force is actually from virtual photons. So we think, well, we have the spin reverses. This is like normally particles repel each other, but if you look at the source of magnetism, it's due to the attraction of the virtual photons as a 1/2 spin reaction. And so this is another way of showing that based on the magnetic moment of the electron and the positron, there's this virtual photon as part of that reaction. And the virtual photon is what creates the magnetic force. And so instead of there being a magnetic monopole as Dirac envisioned in order to maintain this symmetry, what you have is like for the proton, you have a quark where you have an antimatter quark that's dominant. And so the quark is there's three quarks or maybe four, but they're not stable. They have to be in eternal motion. And so we have to think of time, reverse time, as an eternal motion instead of a static, symmetric, spatial measurement. We have to think of ourselves existing in this eternal protoconsciousness as a process that's organic. And it's almost like a animistic vitalism of the universe being alive, And this is what the Pythagoreans taught, that the emptiness is actually breathing as this that creates life, and that's what Penrose is teaching, about, and Schrodinger, that the power of the sun is due to the low entropy from the origin of the universe, where that's what caused mass to gather together. At first the low entropy created the high entropy of matter, because the entropy is reversed between gravity and matter. And most mainstream physics just focuses on the high entropy of matter as energy, so the matter converts back into energy, at the origin of the universe. And this would be another way of saying the relativistic mass of matter, like the kinetic energy of matter, that's the binding energy. So when you look at like the proton with the quarks, most of that energy is actually just the binding energy. And that's why they say that the proton is mainly empty, but the reason why it's empty is due to this reverse time energy. And so like when we look at the work of William, the electrical engineer, he was relying on Louis de Broglie's analysis, and his work was picked up by Dr. Nisha Manek, who co-wrote a Qigong chapter with Chun Yi Lin. William Tiller, that's who I'm thinking of. So the Nisha Manek's book that she published just a few years ago, like maybe 3 years ago or 2 years ago, it's all about reverse time energy. But she's trying to rely on this mainstream physics where they are assuming a symmetry. And so William Tiller, he created this whole new kind of model of physics where he's trying to maintain the symmetry. But again, the problem, like Eddie Oceans, he realized, no, it's actually the non-commutativity, because it's from quantum frequency based on light. So you're able to bypass the speed of light, because the speed of light assumes a symmetric two-way measurement of space-time. In order to measure the speed of light, you have to have a symmetric reversal of time to get that initial speed where the time would be a spatial distance. So instead of speed, the non-local phase the non-locality is this fifth dimension as time, where the future and the past is overlapping. And we know that exists due to quantum entanglement, and they're actually using quantum entanglement for quantum teleportation satellites. And that's what my own quantum physics professor he designed that system using non-commutativity. Only he calls it a donut model, because it's he promoted David Bohm's model of physics, and he said that that quantum physicists are basically creating space-time. They're literally, like, when they set up a quantum entanglement experiment, that quantum entanglement exists before space-time because it's non-local. But the whole point of Basil J. Hiley is that this non-locality already exists. You don't need a quantum entanglement experiment to create non-locality. Whereas mainstream science using technology is assuming you have to create the entanglement as a special condition that's really hard to maintain. Of course, in quantum biology, it's only through meditation that we're able to maintain this, we're able to resonate with this non-locality and able to store up the reverse time energy in the body. And that's what they call the Wan Chi or the cosmic chi. It's called Shakti in Indian yoga. And it's originally called the Ngum from our original human culture, the San Bushman. And that goes back to over 70,000 years ago. It's from before human language was codified, with different dialects. We still had that Alan Bowl dance song by the females, and it's based on the synchronization of the pineal gland with the moon, the lunar energy. And then you get this resonance with the equinox, which we're experiencing right now, and the solstice. And that's sort of the secret origin of religion, that got lost. And it's based on a specific training. And so that got lost with when we started living in cities with farming. And we lost that. It used to be where the men would do long distance hunting, and so they relied on this energy for hunting, and they relied on the spiritual healing. So that's why there's these lineages that have tried to maintain this teaching, this energy healing, that there's a certain training that causes a permanent brain transformation. Normally, as modern humans, we're left brain dominant using technology. And by doing that, we're increasing the entropy of matter by speeding up. We're trying to decrease the entropy of matter, and by doing so, we're increasing the entropy of gravity. And so, if you think of gravity as space-time, what we're really doing is we're relying on time. So it's obvious that technology is accelerating time, and automation is the number one cause of job loss. Of course, the whole concept of jobs is a byproduct of the modern science, because before the 1600s there were no jobs. Everybody just lived off the land, but when you started having specialization with the creation of money for banking, to hire soldiers for wars, for the royalty, and then going into debt, and then so it all ties into this linear concept of time, where you can have this infinite time as defined by infinite money. And if you have infinite money based on, just like Ben Franklin said, time is money. And it's based on this idea of exponential growth. And so then the physicists say, well, the whole universe was created by exponential growth as inflation. And therefore, we can have the inflation of the universe. And so we can also have, inflation of money. It's like they tie it all. This goes all the way back to Plato. There's a good book on this called The Paper Economy by David T. Bazelon. And he points out that the patent law is directly tied to the Platonic mathematics and the creation of money, because the Greeks were the first to define money based on the 10 number system. And when you have the 10 number system you're starting to use decimals, where you're converting the numbers into irrational geometry from the fractions, and then that gets into the logarithmic function, and the exponential function is the inverse of the logarithmic function, and it's all justified by the Western music tuning. So the equal temper tuning is really just mass mind control, promoting this idea that it's okay for the elite wealth to have exponential growth. And then for the masses, we have democracy as based on the logarithmic function. And that so everybody says, well, we really have to have democracy. Well, when we say we really have to have democracy, what we're really saying is we have to have exponential wealth growth for the elite. And then the idea is that we'll all benefit from the technology, but the technology is increasing automation, which is then decreasing the jobs, and then that's decreasing the ability for people to make enough money to pay for their costs, because land is a monopoly. And this is what Michael E. Hudson points out, the economist. And so when you have the financialization of the economy as infinite growth, you're decoupling it from the real economy, which is based on ecology, because the Greek word eco and eco are from the home, that our home is the planet Earth. So now we have this big emphasis on we have to leave Earth. In order to grow the economy, we have to leave Earth. We have to go to Mars and colonize, Sirius or the dwarf planet or whatever it is. And it's all this psychological denial that we're, as humans, we're actually just primates, and we're dependent on the ecology of Earth, which is, the oxygen, the biosphere of the fresh water, clean air, and fertile soil. And, that the soil is all based on the carbon cycle, where the fungi stores the carbon from the plants using photosynthesis, and then the photosynthesis is a non-local energy process that's been proven in quantum biology. So that the actual conversion of the photons into electrochemical energy by the plants is done, again, through non-locality, so that it exists. The same process is happening in our brains when we convert light that we see externally. When we meditate, we can turn that light around and convert it. So like if you practice sun gazing, solar gazing, I was talking about this with one of my farm buddy. He was listening to this lady who said, she tried every other, Wim Hof breathing. She did the Tibetan yoga breathing. She did diet. None of it was working until she tried sun gazing. Now, if you do try sun gazing you have to do it in the early morning or at the sunset. But when you close your eyes, you'll see blue light. Now that blue light is in the very center. It's a very pure blue light. And then you'll see green around that, and then you'll see the red and the orange. You'll see the spectrum, right? But the blue light actually originates from the reverse time energy of the sun. That's actually from the virtual photons. And this is explained with the element gold. And if you study the element gold, it's quantum chemistry, but it's actually relativistic quantum chemistry. So the reason why gold has that color, gold, is only due to because the heavy element gold, the particles, they go close enough to the speed of light where they activate the de Broglie law of phase harmony. So you have this overlap of the reverse time and quantum frequency energy. And you can study this, the phase overlaps, and so that the blue light is absorbing the virtual photons from the future, the reverse time negative frequency energy gets absorbed by the blue light. And that's precisely what you're doing when you do sun gazing. That's what that energy is coming from. And the blue light, when you see the blue light internally, you're actually resonating with this unmanifest sun. The secret sun is the cosmic mother that will never be unveiled. It can never be seen. but you can listen to it through this non-local phase coherence that is can never be seen, but we can listen to it because we can listen faster than time frequency uncertainty, up to 10 times faster, and then we resonate up through the ultrasound, and then the ultrasound goes up into the terahertz, which is the blue frequency, which then itself is resonating with the reverse time and negative frequency. And then if you study the mathematics directly, as Alan Khan has done, he points out that actually entropy itself originates from the discrete numbers of the inner cross products of the matrices, so that it's not really random. It only appears to be indeterminate and random when we do an external measurement due to this limitation of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. But that arises from the non-commutativity that's already existing as proven by the quantum algebraic mathematics, the number. And this is what Pythagoras was originally teaching, is that number actually exists. It is the truth of reality as a process of time. It's an eternal flowing of time with frequency, energy that's discrete. And the reason it's discrete is the same reason that we cannot have a static, symmetric space-time. So that this was the big debate in ancient times between the Brahmin priests and the Buddhist monks. It was, when you see the ring of fire around the sun, when there's an eclipse of the sun by the moon, is that ring of fire the one as a wholeness, or as a substance, or is it the one as the emptiness that we can't see originally? And we find the same debate today about black holes. Like they recently discovered that the plasma jet coming out that gets emitted out of a black hole is tied directly to the Hawking radiation that's emitted as quantum, as the black hole slowly dissipates its stored up information as energy. So essentially the information in the black hole is this reverse time energy, but it slowly dissipates as quantum Hawking radiation. And the reason that it's not a white hole is because of this gravitational potential. Because when you have gravity appears to be very, very weak as a force, but when you have it as a singularity in a black hole, obviously gravity is very, very strong. And what happens is as all the matter gets converted back into photons, that turns the gravitational collapse into a gravitational reverse time low entropy, or gravitational potential, as dark energy. And so it inherently cannot be seen because it's dark energy from the future. Now, we think, because of this Zoroastrian philosophy, we think of time as a linear time that is a spatial symmetry measurement. And this is, Zoroastrian philosophy is complementary with Brahmin philosophy. So they're essentially the same thing, Like my name Drew means angel in Zoroastrian, but it means devil or demon in Sanskrit, or it's the other way around. I can't remember. And they're spelled D-R-U-J or D-R-U-H, and so this is the origin of my name originally, with the Druid, which is that's from Indo-European, but so at any rate, what I'm getting at here is that we need to stop thinking of time as a linear fashion. Like what linear causality is based on this idea of symmetric space-time. But in fact, the truth of time is that the future and the past are overlapping. And so then in ancient times, you think of it as cyclical, or a spiral. But if we can't visualize time inherently, then we have to accept that we can have visions of the future in just pure light, because the light has relativistic mass, and this is what they call the quantum Zeno effect. And this is what this panoramic seer book, he's trying to explain that. He says you get visions in snapshots, and then you have to put the snapshots together to tell a story. And the visions can be prophetic and healing energy. And now I don't know, maybe this guy's fake. Maybe he's fake and he's just writing it down and explaining it. And then this book, it just goes into the history of how the ancient teachings from Zoroastrian philosophy then combined with Judaism in order to create, eventually like Christianity when it was Hellenized by Greek philosophy, and then combined with, Egyptian philosophy. And so this is what created modern science, is that it's from Platonic philosophy, but that also was influenced, of course, by Zoroastrian and Babylonian mathematics. And so then, but if we look at our sense of time as the future overlapping with the past, then if we just listen to the source of light, we're able to go deeper into the future. And this is what they mean by the quantum potential in physics. But in terms of like meditation, they just say, well, most of your life is determined by fate. But if the more you meditate, the more you can change your fate. And so, like, if you have a precognitive vision, it's actually more real than being awake, because if all of our perceptions originate from quantum non-locality, that quantum non-locality originates as light originally. All matter is actually made of light. And so then, and this is Penrose's whole point, is that all the matter in the black holes as singularities eventually dissipates as light from Hawking radiation. And that's the creation of the next universe in the future. But that creation process exists in the fifth dimension that has no size, because it's pure time. It's a flowing as pure time, with the future and the past overlapping. And this is what people don't understand about Penrose, is because he's talking about non-commutativity. But most scientists, they don't even acknowledge, the latest version of his analysis calls the palatial twistor model. And it's all based on non-commutativity. So when the atheist Richard Dawkins guy, Lawrence Krauss, and he tried to pigeonhole Roger Penrose, and he's like, well, I read your latest book or whatever, but that latest book was from like 10 years ago, and meanwhile Roger Penrose, he's done all these lectures that have been posted on YouTube or on the internet, and he's been collaborating with all these new scientists. And so it's really funny, because Roger Penrose, he's like 91 years old, and then you got somebody coming along who they want to pigeonhole Roger Penrose, but Roger Penrose he continues to learn, and he admits, even though he's a mathematician and he taught Stephen Hawking, that he's not good at doing non-commutative geometry. He's not good at the quantum algebra math. And this is Alon Khan's point, is that the mainstream science finds non-commutativity very strange, because as soon as you start using zero and irrational numbers, you're doing commutative geometry. And it's based on this idea that time is contained as a spatial symmetry measurement. And so and that's why, like, Dr. Ruth E. Kastner, she's critical of, the weak measurement experiments again, because they're making the same assumption. And Olivier Costa de Beauregard, he was using Richard Feynman's S matrix wave, the same thing. It's like a calculus. So you're assuming, again, this symmetric spatial measurement as reverse time, whereas in fact, if in non-commutativity, if you never have the collapse of the wave function, then you never have to go to that classical limit that converts to the Poisson bracket by squaring the discrete numbers of the matrices using the Jordan commutator. So the Jordan commutator, or the Jordan bracket or something, but that's from Pascual Jordan in the 1930s. And he argued, he was the first one to argue that this non-commutativity self-amplifies the non-locality into the macro scale, and that explains quantum biology. And he was arguing this before Schrödinger. But the problem is that, he also was a Nazi, which is totally, evil. And so, for good reason, his views were ignored by science. But they've since gone back and discovered, this is what he was. And the other thing is that his research would have been influential on the anti-gravity aircraft research, and they like the people who research the anti-gravity aircraft technology, they're saying, well, why didn't they bring Pascual Jordan into the U.S. As part of Operation Paperclip? But the thing is they would not have had to do that, because his ideas, like he said when they interviewed Pascual Jordan, he was dismissed at the time, so that's why they wouldn't have brought him over. But once spin was codified, with Wolfgang Pauli was spin, then that corroborated Pascual Jordan's non-commutative claim about quantum physics being inherently, like, in order to understand spin, you have to use the Heisenberg matrices as relativistic quantum physics. And so you cannot, the Schrödinger equation, Schrödinger was trying to avoid relativity, even though his wave equation was based on De Broglie's wave model of reality, and De Broglie was critiquing relativity, but De Broglie was doing it before the concept of spin was codified by Wolfgang Pauli. So you can think of spin again as this originating from the negative frequency and reverse time. But what Basil J. Hiley's whole point is that spin being non-local is actually, it's inherently not a wave, because you can't visualize it inherently due to the logic of the mathematics with time as a fifth dimension. And so what, Basil J. Hiley, in his email response to me, is like, well, the relativistic quantum physics in matrices, you have four phases at the exact same time, and they're non-commutative and also non-local. And so he said, well, there's really no way to visualize that as a wave. It just doesn't make sense. But that's true. But it's also true that logically it's inherently not a wave, the spin, because again, the mathematics proves that you can't visualize it, because it's this fifth dimension of time. So when we say, well, what is reverse time? It's another way of saying that our ego is still light. The consciousness is still light. And this is what they call the spiritual ego. And so Ramana Maharshi's whole big emphasis is that even all the astral realms, eventually those are all illusions. And you find this in Chan Buddhism too, Master Nan Hua Chin. He said, even if you are able to maintain consciousness of your spirit and have it leave your body at death and you go out into the heavens, like into the solar system, eventually there's going to be some cosmic cataclysm that destroys the solar system, and this gets back to, eventually everything goes into a black hole, and what does that mean? And so the whole point being is you can have all these spiritual powers, but they're really, eventually they're tricks of the spiritual ego. And all of that, all those powers originate from the source of light, which is this reverse time energy that can only be logically inferred and listened to in the emptiness. And everything else is hypocrisy, essentially. And so it all comes back to music and listening as the source of reality. Whereas as humans, our modern bias is a visual dominance using tools externally. We're no longer, we're cutting down the rainforest, rapidly. And people, as cultures, it's very difficult for them to live off the land. How many people have lived without electricity, without plumbing, without heat? Most people, they live hooked up to the grid. Most people around the world now, they're born into a city. And so they're disconnected from living off the land and what it means to be a primate that is dependent on Earth as our ecology, our habitat. And even farming is this artificial construct where we're trying to, remove all the, all the weeds, and then you get this whole idea of monoculture as monotheism. There's a direct Vandana Shiva, the quantum physicist who studied non-locality. She has a great book called Monocultures of the Mind, and that's essentially this whole idea of symmetry, which is from the Brahmin priesthood. There's a Vedic Brahmin logical code using 0 and 1 and the geometric symbol, where you try to have a one-to-one correspondence between number and geometry. And Gödel proved that that's not possible, that's the incompleteness theorem in set theory. And so consciousness is not a calculation, but consciousness is this understanding of meaning based on information in time. Like if you put your socks on after you put your shoes on, then obviously that changes the meaning of what socks are, because they serve a function based on the order of time, and so the whole idea of what is reverse time is really what is the truth of reality. It's not based on something we can see. Time has to be listened to. And this is what Ramana Maharshi calls Muna Samadhi, as the ultimate Samadhi, silence Samadhi. And with that, I'm going to finally try to shut up for a little bit. I'm on this coffee diet, so I tend to rant and rave a lot. So thanks if anybody can bear with me with that one.